how can you get past your sexual harm this year? I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Relationship Prescriptions. Now, that's a really big promise, so I want to clarify right from the start. The journey to get past what happened to you can sometimes be long, but you can actively, proactively, intentionally take steps that will move you past being stuck. And you can do that this year. Whatever issues you have, you didn't wake up one day and decide to have issues, especially when it comes to sexual issues. One young man named Bob said, "Now my issues have issues." And so when you realize that you didn't wake up one day and just decide to hate sex, or to be addicted to porn, or to be going from one hookup to another, or to have an affair on your spouse. You didn't wake up one day and just decide to get an STD, or whatever the sexual stuff has brought to you. Something was behind that. That's what I mean by looking at the harm. Every one of us has in some way been harmed sexually. Now, when I make that statement, you might feel, well, yeah, I can see that, and that's why I'm stuck, and what do I do about it? You can also sometimes be tempted to minimize that. Well, what happened to me wasn't nearly as bad as what happened to somebody else, so I should just get over it and forget it. But then it keeps rearing its ugly head in your life or in your emotions or your behaviors, and you're not getting past it. You might also see your own sexual issues with a lot of self-contempt because of the way that you may have responded. Maybe, as some others, hurting people hurt people, and maybe you have hurt people as a result. Or maybe you see that you have made choices in which in some way you were your own worst enemy. Or maybe just a lot of shame because of what happened to you, and you wrestle with, well, that must in some way be my fault, whatever the way you feel about that sexual harm. I want to pause and acknowledge something happened to you. That is not the sum total of who you are, but something happened. And if you want to get past your sexual issues, we need to start there. Dr. Dan Allender is a Christian psychiatrist, decades-long work, especially in dealing with sexual harm, the after effects, and helping people find healing. He wrote this, that we need to get past the presumption that we have not suffered sexual harm. We all have. Each and every individual on earth has known some assault against their gender and or genitalia. Some of the harm is obvious and severe. Other harm is so subtle and normalized that it seems ridiculous to call it abuse. But sexual abuse is often far subtler and extensive than most of us have considered. The way that your being responds to being harmed, especially when it comes to sexuality, cuts very, very deep. I believe that in large measure, that is because of how God created us in His image with the need, desire, and capacity for intimacy. Evil knows that. Evil knows how much your heart needs intimacy. And so evil works very hard and takes great delight in stealing, killing, and destroying, is in marring you in that way. Evil does not have the last word, but it is a very powerful assault. Dr. Dan Allender, again, evil hates what God reveals in and through the creation of humanity, especially with regard to gender and sexuality. Nothing brings evil greater delight or power than to foul our joy in being a man or a woman through sexual harm or gender confusion on one hand, or dogmatism on the other. So confusion, harm, dogmatism, what happened to you? There are plenty of categories of sexual harm, and I just want to take a minute to highlight a few of these categories, and then we're going to talk about what can you do as you see this about yourself. Certainly there is the gross categories of sexual abuse, perhaps as a child or young person. Statistically, that tends to happen more often in girls and young women. However, we are understanding more and more that boys and young men have this experience too, much more than was previously talked about. So this applies to both boys and girls, men and women. There's the rape, the sexual violence, the exploitation, again, both boys and girls, although statistically perhaps more in women, but by no means does that exclude men. I have recently talked with a number of men who have experienced sexual harm and have found it especially hard to do the work to get past it. Thankfully, that is becoming better understood now. There is the category of distorted templates in your own mind about intimacy and sexuality and relationships. What did you see growing up in your family of origin or whatever the environment was that you grew up in? You saw and learned things long before you ever knew you were learning about sex and intimacy and relationships. And what did all that mean? What about power roles and men and women? And I could talk for a long time about the potential things you may have learned. But pause and just consider, how did you learn about sex? There's the category of early exposure to porn, which is the answer to that question for so many. And while that may not overtly seem to be in the same category as sexual abuse, it is sexual harm because you saw and learned things in porn that distorted the way your brain developed and what you saw and learned about arousal when it comes to yourself because of porn. There's the category of early sexualization through things like, dance or acting or beauty pageants, that kind of thing. There can be a lot of good in many of those categories, but it takes a very vigilant parent or caretaker to involve a child in that kind of environment without letting them be sexualized too early. That can be a category of sexual harm. It may have been the no sex talk. You may have come to adulthood without anyone giving you information or a safe place to talk about what you were experiencing as you came to know about sex from any other source. That can be harmful. It can be damaging. You may, through early sexual relationships or in marriage, have experienced sexual harm. Marital rape, sadly, is real. Gross power differentials and all of that. Physical pain, emotional pain, exploitation, even in a marriage that was supposed to be safe and nourishing, but was just the opposite. And then there are the religious messages. Put God and sex in the same sentence. What would that sentence be? For some, it's, I hate that God made me a sexual being because therefore it's led me to all this harm and shame. The religious messages you learned, perhaps in church, or from people who purported to be speaking in the name of God, may have technically been, quotes, true, air quotes, but they also may have been very distorted and incomplete, where you see God as an ogre, as somebody who is mandating and caring more about behaviors than about your heart. So the religious messages can also be harmful. Regardless of the one or likely several categories in which you have experienced harm to your sexuality or gender, You cannot just get over it by deciding to get over it. That left brain conscious choice is important, but it by no means is sufficient in bringing you the wholeness and healing that is needed. Regardless of which of these categories of sexual harm you experienced, there was an impact on your body, on your mind, on your soul, on your relationships, on your spirit, the spiritual part of you. The impact on your body may have impacted your ability to be sexually aroused in a loving marital relationship. It may have created an aversion to intimacy, whether sexual intimacy or otherwise, that you do not wake up one day and decide to hate intimacy or hate sex. And again, intimacy and sex related, but not the same. You may have an arousal template that got formed by porn or certain other kinds of early sexualization that is not serving you well. All of that impact on your body is part of the fallout of the harm. Then on your mind, you have come to believe things that, whether or not they have a portion of truth, are more lies. Sometimes there's just enough truth to give it plausibility, to give the lie plausibility, but it really is a lie. Things like, you must have a happy, active, fulfilling sex life in order to be fully alive and whole. Really? Now that lie is common in culture. The church, the Christian church, oftentimes tries to, quotes, baptize that lie to say, therefore you must get married. No, Jesus was never married, never had sex, and he was fully alive and whole. That's a big discussion on itself. But that's one of the lies that you may have come to believe that can be part of the way you were harmed in your sexuality. Other lies you have come to believe is that this is what men want, or this is what women want, that you may have learned out of porn, or that I am only good for my sexuality. That is my means of power. Dominating it over someone else, either if you're a man with your sexual aggressiveness or a woman with your sexual seductiveness. Another lie may be, nobody will ever want me because of what has happened to me or because of what I have done. And there can be many other lies as well. The wounds in your soul, the empty places, the impact on your mind can be among the hardest things to get past. There's the impact on your relationships out of the sexual harm you experienced. Because of how your body and your mind were formed when it comes to intimacy and relationships and sexuality, you may struggle in relating to other human beings in a healthy way. Maybe you lead with your sexuality and you're always on the hunt. Maybe you try and hide the sexual part of you. And you just put up walls between you and other people that may not be necessary once you learn what the truth is and find healing. And then the impact on your relationship with God. Because of what happened to you, and accompanying that with religious messages you almost certainly have heard. So many people who have experienced sexual harm feel a distance from God. Sometimes that's because of how they responded to the sexual harm, and they acted out in ungodly ways sexually, and so God must hate me. Sometimes that can be because, well, if God were good, he would not have let me be harmed in this way. So there can be all kinds of barriers between you and God as some of the fallout of the sexual harm that you experienced. So what do we do about all this? Certainly, there is in today's world the category of trauma-informed care. And that has been a wonderful blessing to so many, whether that's Christian therapists, EMDR, pastors who have become more knowledgeable, therapy groups where these issues can be talked about. But I want to give you a few specific things for yourself. Yes, it's appropriate and wise to go get help, but I want to give you some tools just in your own home, life, mind, body that you can embrace. By yourself to do some of this work and get past being stuck by the sexual harm that happened to you. So the first one is deal with how did intimacy go wrong for you? I like to put all this harm under the category of intimacy gone wrong. You look at the Bible. Intimacy went wrong in Genesis chapter 3. As soon as sin entered the world, Adam and Eve started to hide. And the shame that covered their bodies, especially the sexual part of them, and all the permutations of the harm that came in all kinds of ways after that. So specifically, how has intimacy gone wrong for you? Start with acknowledging as best as you can, what happened to you. I would encourage you to do some journaling. That can be a powerful way to deal with this particular step. Rather than just trying to ignore it, bring it into the light. Bringing things into the light disinfects the shame. Take the courage to acknowledge, first of all, to yourself, what happened to you, what happened to your body, to the sexual parts of your body, and then what did you come to believe as a result? That, in many ways, is almost a more impactful aspect of the sexual harm than the acts or experiences themselves. What did you come to believe as a result? Take some time to write that down. Number 2, choose healing. This is a big category, and at first, choosing healing may seem like, an oxymoron. How can you choose healing? You may have been praying for God to heal you. You may have been struggling and wonder why nothing seems to help. But I want to put it in an analogy like this. Healing, in many ways, is like food. God makes an infinite variety of physical food available, but He doesn't harvest the grain, grind it, bake your bread, and hand you a sandwich. He doesn't catch the fish, skin it, bake it, and put it on your plate for dinner. We have to know when we're hungry, choose food, and actually take it into our being and metabolize it. That's what I mean by choosing healing. There is healing out there. Make the choice to seek it and take it in. For some of you, even watching this video or listening to this podcast is part of that. If you are still here at this point in this particular episode, just staying here can be part of choosing healing for you. And I'm going to talk about a resource that at Dr. Carroll Ministries we have available for you now in just a minute that can be part of choosing healing for you. And then whatever you can next say yes to that next step. Many of us might love to say yes to healing if God would just drop it on you from on high. But most of the time, He takes you through a process. So what is the next step in front of you to take? Say yes to that. For some of you, it might be you say yes to not denying any longer how you were harmed. What I mentioned a minute ago about looking at what happened to you and journaling, writing it down, that may be a big yes for you. Maybe that's where you need to start. Maybe the next yes for you is you tell somebody. There are many individuals, men and women, who I have worked with in these areas that will say something to me like, this is something I've never told anybody. Maybe you've told little pieces, but you haven't told the hardest part, the part that is the most painful or you feel the most ashamed about. Maybe for you, the yes is find one person to tell that part to. That can be a challenging step, but can truly be life-changing. The yes for many of you may be getting some help. Beyond just telling one person, maybe that is, joining a therapy group, seeking a counselor or a truly knowledgeable pastor. That may be the next yes for you. Or the yes may be taking advantage of the resource I'm going to share with you in just a moment. So 3 keys to taking steps proactively to find healing for your sexual harm. Number 1, look at where has intimacy gone wrong for you. Number 2, choose healing. And then number 3, invite Jesus into your story. You may intellectually believe that he knows what happened to you. You may even intellectually agree that he is good and he wants you to be healed, but your heart struggles to truly, fully embrace that. Your heart struggles to let him in. I was talking with someone just a few days ago, in this case, a young man who had been both sexually harmed and who also acted in ways that harmed others because of that. And he said, it's one thing for me to imagine telling Jesus about it, but to imagine letting him right into my story, that feels like it's just too big. It kind of feels impossible. Let me encourage you to invite him in anyway. If you are afraid, just come to him. He just says, come. If you feel ashamed and broken, just come. If you feel anxious and not sure you can do this, just come. Whatever it is that's going on with you, just come. One way, practical way that you may want to do that is to write a letter to Jesus. Imagine sitting in your living room or your bedroom or your study. Imagine just being in a safe place and Jesus is there in the room with you. What would you say to him if you could see him with your physical eyes? If you could hear him with your physical ears? What would you say to him? Write that. Write a letter to Jesus. It can be a great way to allow him and invite him in. And that is when things will start to change. We have a resource at Dr. Carroll Ministries that walks you through these different steps and more. Our Sexpectations course, all brand new videos and worksheets and content. I would love you to take advantage of this Sexpectations online course. This is a course with 10 video modules that you can watch in the privacy of your own home, on your own time, at your own pace. This course is about helping you look at your story, at what happened to you and what you did as a response. Look at your story with honesty and compassion. That's how Jesus looks at your story, with honesty and compassion. That in itself can seem daunting, but this course will help you do that. It will help you make the choice for healing. and give you practical steps to implement in your day-to-day life. What does that look like in talking to somebody and telling your story? Some practical ways to do that if you're struggling. How do you deal with the sexual drives that you feel if that has been a problem and you've been acting out? How do you handle your aversion to sex if you're married and it's not okay, or there's walls up between you and other people, and you need to deal with that so that you can have any healthy relationships at all? Some practical steps in how you do that. And then perhaps most important, what does it look like to invite Jesus into your story? There are aspects in this online course that will allow you to experience Jesus coming into your story. We call them guided reflections. I think this is my favorite part of this online course. We take some scripture passages. Most of them are from the Gospels, when Jesus was here on earth. Most of them are from there. And we take a little passage, and then we put that in the 21st century. What would it look like if Jesus were in your world today in the 21st century? What would that experience be like? And we just walk you through that in a guided reflection. As we have shared this with a few people, we have heard amazing response about how inviting Jesus into those places in your soul can change things. The teaching modules and the guided reflection videos and downloadable worksheets to help you actually implement the specific steps that we put in place. All of that is within this Sexpectations online video course. yoursexpectations.com. Make sure to put the your there, yoursexpectations.com, or click the link in the show notes if you're watching. Click the link under this video if you're watching, or in the show notes if you're listening. Yoursexpectations.com. I would both challenge and encourage you to get this online digital course and take the steps to get past your sexual harm this year. You can get unstuck. I know that this Sexpectations course will help you get unstuck, and I encourage and challenge you to do that today. I love hearing from you. You can use the contact page on our website to leave me a confidential message, and I'll get back to you. You can also, if you're watching, just leave a comment under this video here on YouTube. I read all of those as well. Thank you for staying with me till this point in this episode. I appreciate you being part of our online digital family. And again, I love to hear from you. I pray for you. I have a request. Would you share this with someone? You know somebody who is also struggling in this area. If you're listening, use the share feature on your podcast and leave a rating and review. If you're watching on YouTube, just share this link. Make sure you're subscribed. I would thank you greatly for doing that. And now, until next time, may God bless you.